Hello and welcome to the Stateside Soccer Show. My name is Jordan Wiegand, and with me is a man here who is currently the favorite to replace Adrian Heath at Minnesota United. It's Logan Stump.
I won't be this year though. Like they need
No,
to struggle like a couple
he
more
signed a
years,
2-year deal,
right?
didn't he? So we
Yeah.
got a bit.
Adrian out. Hashtag Adrian out. Let's get started. Let's get laminated.
No, you know who already has it started is Mark Fangmeyer. I see him post that every year.
I love Mark. Mark was commenting on the poor Philadelphia fan base, man, just absolutely getting wrecked this year. Just absolutely.
The EGOT of sports losing is what he said that they are currently in the hunt for. Yeah,
they're winning the treble as a city, and by winning the treble, they're losing the treble as a city.
I feel for my Philadelphia brethren, but I'm only a Union fan because I'm not actually from Philly. So these other ones did not affect me at all. So I guess that's good for me, right? But yeah. So we're recording this. We're live Monday after the Super Bowl. So I'm sure there's tons of people that are just now waking up from their partying after the Super Bowl. Kansas City is just waking up and they're going to hear us talk about sporting Kansas City. So that's why we decided let's not go live in the morning. We'll go live at 6:45 p.m. Eastern time just to give Kansas City people time to sleep off the late night. You know, being on the West Coast is probably the best if you are a fan of NFL football, not so much a fan of EPL. Then you're waking up 4 o'clock. But I'm so envious of the West Coast people. People like my friend Casey, who does some other podcasts with me. He's a West Coast fan that watches football all Sunday. Those games start for him at like 10 a.m. And by the time Sunday Night Football is done, it is like 8 o'clock, and they could still go do something. Like you can still be like, "Oh, I can go catch that movie that I wanted to see tonight." So lucky over there. I guess that's a big question I have going forward before we jump into these teams. Not to make the episode longer, but when we're looking at MLS and we're looking at now that they're kind of not tethered to national TV. Is MLS Cup during the day or is this becoming a nighttime game? I think Fox is still broadcasting them linearly for MLS Cup for the first few years. So maybe it'll still be an afternoon game, but I like night games, man. We need MLS After Dark, MLS Cup final is what I'm hoping for at some point because I think that's fun. Like a Saturday night at kickoff at 7 o'clock. It'll still be over by 9. If it goes extra time, it's over by 10. So maybe you start at 6. I don't know. But I'm just thinking it would be nice to have like a proper prime time kickoff, especially I think Apple might like that too. I don't know.
I was gonna say you could do the 6:30 kickoff like Fox does with the Super Bowl. The great thing about soccer is that it'll be over by 8:30, 9 o'clock, unless you have like halftime shows or something like that. I'm guessing the league will eventually get to that point where
they were at that point before 2007. Yeah. I remember I was at MLS Cup, still an afternoon game then, but they had Jimmy Eat World as the halftime show in 2007. So that was a pretty high bar. All right, they were like one hit wonder at that time. They started getting some other songs, but that was when they were trying to be the NFL, when they're like, we're at neutral stadiums, we got a halftime show. I'm kind of glad that they're not at that anymore with the halftime show, but I don't know, maybe the Apple money will get them that. I mean, Apple was all over it. When did Apple take over the Super Bowl halftime show? Because it's been Pepsi for like most of my life, I feel
This is the first year. This is the first year, which is
was
wild.
The first year? That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. If you guys missed it, last night Rihanna actually announced the playoff format, which is wild. If you haven't seen that, go back and look for it during the halftime show, and then come back and yell at us because it's not actually in there.
The answer is like when she's moving those platforms up and down. It's like, okay, right. So that's the 7th seed and that's the 6th. Yeah, like they had the steps going up there. No, but to highlight something, it is still ridiculous we do not know that as we approach now 12 days from the start of the season. Still no clue on playoff format, how many teams are making it in, none of that. At this point, I'm thinking we're going to know the day before is kind of when I'm starting to think that's going to be announced. All right, so I guess let's go on to our first team. It is the future Logan Stump-led Minnesota United current head coach, not for long, Adrian Heath here. Let's reflect on last year. They finished sixth in the West. They scored 48 and gave up 51. Lead goal scorer Reynoso, that's might be a problem as we go forward and explain that situation if you've been living under a rock. But I guess looking back on it, I think both of us are maybe in alignment that this was not a successful season for Minnesota United. It seemed like a huge dip. There was a time where they were looking that they were not going to make the playoffs at all. They had a good run in the summer, and then Adrian Heath signed a contract extension, and then they completely started dipping before rising again to get the second to last playoff spot. So, Logan, your thoughts? Was this successful for Minnesota last season?
Yeah, no. You and I are in agreement on this team, and we've got friends that are fans of this team, Jack and AJ over at the Final Third, who are tortured endlessly with this team and the promise that they show. Jordan, I remember covering this league in our first year, and we sat there talking to Mark. We sat there and talked to Jack last year and AJ, and it just seems like this team is it's got so much promise that like it just never lives up to the hype of that promise and what that looks like and what the future looks like for this team. But I mean, they've just been to give up 51 goals in a Western Conference that is pretty good defensively, to score 48 goals and still, sit sixth. It's not a great goal goal output for the season, but it's not horrible. It's not one of the worst. So, there's room for improvement on the attack, but it just seemed like the defense last year was just abysmal. They did have a good thing come out of it, which sounds funny just because we talked about how poor their defense was. Is actually their goalkeeper Dane St. Clair finally stepped up and kind of proved to why he could be a top goalkeeper in this league, top goalkeeper in the world. I think he's got that Canada #1 spot lined up. Maxime Crepeau is probably Canada's #1 right now, but I think Dane St. Clair could easily become that with just a little bit more work. But you look at Robin Lod, you look at Franco Fragapane, Amaria. I mean, Jordan, we can name, and you've been watching them longer than I have, and they haven't been around that long, but it just seems like it's a revolving door or carousel of just people in the attack that they just can't figure out where to go and get goal scorers. But I mean, that's what it seemed like this team was. They're so unidentifiable when you look at how they play, why they play the way that they do. And it really sucks because I think their fan base could be one of the best.
So here's what I want to highlight, right? This is kind of where they've been since 2019. Okay, so 2019, they finished 4th in the West. All right. 4th in the West. In the playoffs, they get knocked out by LA Galaxy in the first round. 2020, they finish, I think, let me just double check because I just saw it. They finished 4th in the West. All right, 2020. But they made it to the conference finals. Seattle came back from behind to win that game. I think Minnesota was leading 2-0, and it was like, oh my God, this is nuts. And then Seattle wins 3-2. All right, so that's where they were, conference finals. So going into 2021, we said the bar should be improving on that, right? Maybe getting to a final or at least going up the table a bit. I'm pretty sure that's what we said. That feels like what we said. 2021, where they end up, worse, 5th in the West. Where do they get bounced out of the playoffs in 2021? They get bounced out in the first round by the Portland Timbers. So a huge regression at that point. 2022, where do they finish on the table? 6. So the last 3 years, for a while, it was like 2 years in a row, 4th place. They get dropped to 5th and they drop to 6th. And they go from a conference final to 2 back-to-back like first round exits. It's not good, right? And then what was 2020? They get bounced out first as well. I'm checking. Yeah, Dallas won on penalty kicks in the first round. 3 straight first round losses in the playoffs since 2020 when they made a conference final and were literally so close to reaching an MLS Cup final. It's a regression, a huge regression each year since that 2020 season. And in 2019 and 2020 was actually improvement. Both finished 4th. But that conference final was like that step. And you're like, this Minnesota team is starting to make the leap. And then 2021, 2022, falling backwards a bit.
Yeah, last year they lost Diabasi, lost Roman Manzanir. They lose him now officially as a departure. And his defense is just a nightmare going forward. And they just don't – I just feel like they don't have enough defensively nor in the attack around Reynoso to make a difference. Like, that's what it feels like.
I got that wrong. 2 straight years. I know at one point I said 3 straight years of first round exits. 2 straight, because I was counting the 2019. I skipped 2020. But I guess I'm predicting where I think they're falling this year. My apologies there. But yeah, 2 straight seasons, 2021 and 2022 were both first round exits after 2020 reaching the Western Conference final.
But yeah, I mean, moving into their rivals, it's not much. They get a center back, Swedish second tier player in Mikael Marquez. From everything I had kind of read, he's expected to be thrown in there and maybe expected to start with some of the injury issues that they have had or will have, because it just seems like this team is plagued by bad luck at times. I think they go out and get Cameron Dunbar, who's a backup winger at best. He wasn't great with the Galaxy, and the Galaxy were able to unload he and Kevin Cabral for basically a bag of peanuts. But I think getting him off the books was great, but that doesn't really add much. And then you go and get Miguel Tapias, who's a center back, who I think is actually one of the better options that they'll have, coming from Pachuca and Liga MX. So, I mean, you're looking at this depth chart and you're looking at guys that will fill in and eventually replace some of these players that have been hurt, like a Roman Metzner, or if Diabasi can't go right away, then it's going to be one of these, backup center backs. But Jordan, I just feel like this team they try to make a splash, but it's so small and irrelevant. And I feel like this team has been irrelevant since I've started covering the league.
Well, let's talk about Reynoso, because that is the big question mark, right? If we're going to run it back with almost the same roster, with just 3 additions that are not groundbreaking, but then you can't run it back with the full team because Reynoso may not be back. We don't really know what's going on with him. He had problems last year, legal problems, right? And almost didn't make it. This year, it's more like he doesn't feel right, or doesn't feel, I guess, mentally right.
Yeah, doesn't want to come.
Doesn't want to leave home.
Yeah,
right. To the point where you're like, okay, I feel for him, but then when you get the suspension and the fine or whatever from Major League Soccer, you're like, okay, maybe there's something more going on here. Maybe he's just protesting and not coming back. This team without Reynoso, who had 10 goals, is going nowhere, right? This will be something that's he came into league in 2020 on that run to the conference finals, and they were looking pretty sharp, and he looked great. He never really reached those peaks again. 2021, I think he had a good year. 2022 was all right, but he's still a missing piece of this team if they don't have him. So then it's another player you have to replace. And we all know how that is, right? When you have to replace a player that you're not sure you're going to hit on when you bring them over from another country. And that is some of the problems. Reynoso came over and was immediately a hit. Okay, the next guy might not be. And then do you dwindle? Like, what is going on here? At that point, do you move on from Heath at that point? Or is he like so much in with this front office that he's going to be able to keep signing 2-year extension? We kind of thought he was maybe gone, right? We thought maybe, I thought so anyway, that, okay, that last year was the last year of his contract. It's not really going anywhere. Move on amicably, but I can't even say that. But then we get into where he signs his contract the moment they had like a nice hot streak, and then they immediately started falling back down again, right? So they're the big question mark right now with Reynoso. What is happening? Is he going to be coming over? And we shouldn't have to worry about that 12 days. Is he going to be in shape when he comes back? We don't know. How long can they go without Reynoso before he comes back and helps lift this team? Or is he just gone? It's not like they can sell him right now, I don't think. So, what do you do in that situation?
Yeah, so he's got 16 goal contributions as far as assist and goals scored are concerned, and they scored 48 last year, so that would take it down to the number of 32. And obviously, there would be people playing in place of him, but still, you're not going to get the production that he has. He was touted as one of those like Carles Heel. He was one of those special players like Hani Mukhtar. Like he was that midfield general that really just I think could create chances, build up play really well. You build up from the back and kind of go through that midfield with him, and then he's going to provide and distribute for the goal scorers ahead of him. But the problem is Minnesota's never had those goal scorers ahead of him. The three in the attack are kind of like the three headless monsters. It's like it just feels like they just don't have any kind of bite, and he's the only one with bite. I don't think he's having fun. I don't think Adrian Heath is really his guy. I think he's kind of had enough of Reynoso. Reynoso's had enough of him. I think there becomes a point where Reynoso looks at this situation and maybe there's some trouble back in Argentina where he is, but there are also some concern probably for his mental health and what he wants to do as far as building off of a career that he's been pretty successful in Minnesota. So I don't know. I think this is massive. Like if they lose him for the season, I mean, you're looking at a team, Jordan, that I think could be in danger of falling all the way down towards the bottom of the Western Conference with teams that they don't really belong with, but just because they don't have any kind of attack going forward without him, it's a real concern, I think, for this team.
Yeah, just looking at the placement from last season, do you know how much they made the playoffs by? 2 points, right? If Timbers had gotten one more win in that season, the Timbers are in. Minnesota would still be in because that would push RSL out. But, it didn't take much for them to fall out if possible, right? We're also had a down year for Seattle. So if Seattle and Portland rebound this year, then I think it's fair to think it's possible for Minnesota to drop out. Now, of course, Nashville's leaving the West, so that opens up a spot. We probably don't think St. Louis is going to be an immediate hit. You'll have to wait for that preview, I guess. But the West is so stacked. It is very hard to look at this listing on the table and think, oh, they can easily get back in again, especially if Reynoso's out for a long period of time, and if they don't get contributions from somebody else. Amaria had 9 goals for them. I didn't think he looked that great last year. 9 goals, I feel like, kind of favors him a bit. Like, it didn't look like a 9-goal season from Amaria for me. So there's this just kind of issue of where do they go from here? This is probably the team, I think, in the West that is the most question marks out of a playoff team that we just saw make the playoffs. I think they have more question marks than RSL. I know we just ripped RSL probably a few weeks back, or a week ago. I think just the fact that they might lose their signature DP, or he might not be back for whoever. We don't know, is a big issue. And I'm expecting Seattle and Portland to do better than they did last year. So in my opinion, they're probably falling out of the playoff spots. But I'm saving that prediction for our show, the prediction show. So now it's more of a question, Logan, of what's a successful season for a team like Minnesota this season? Because they've gone from 4th to 5th to 6th. You don't want to fall 7th or 8th, right? You don't want to keep falling down, but I think we have to be, I think I'm going to be the harshest I can be here. They have to improve. They have to get 4th, I think, to be a successful season. If you're spinning your wheels and you end up 5th or 6th again, or you drop out of the playoffs, God forbid, Heath should be gone, and you should actually start rebuilding this team because the fan base is there. There's a lot to do here with it feels like they're just kind of stuck in this limbo.
I would go as far as to say, this is going to sound really harsh, but I would say do not embarrass yourself this season. That's the goal, because I think that this team is hovering, Jordan, right around that significant level of just like one wrong move and this thing goes south quickly. Because I think, and it is this Reynoso stuff. If this thing carries on, or Jordan, if he pushes their hand and he's sold, the window's done. Like, you can't go get some of these players anymore. So you can't go get this, like you said, signature DP, who is probably one of the top midfielders in this league. I mean, it just destroys the middle of that pitch. Robin Lod, I think, is his backup, which he's a winger. So he's going to have to come out of that wing spot that's usually his bread and butter. And, you know, he's one of the only other players in this attack that kind of looks formidable. He comes out of that, Jordan, and this team, oh my gosh, like, I feel so bad for Minnesota fans just because I do know how passionate they can be. We've seen it with the Vikings. We've seen it with the Timberwolves. They've got bad teams in that area for a very long time, but this fan base has just always backed them. It just, Adrian Heath, I think, loses his job this year. I think it doesn't matter how many more extensions you can really throw at the guy. I think this is the year that because I think from this point on, Jordan, you rebuild it. You have to. You got to tear this thing down. It's not going to go forward.
So I'll one-up you here. I'm going to ask you another question. Is he the first manager fired this season?
That's a really good one. I'm kind of like looking around, thinking about the guys that could be in danger, right? I think so. Yeah, I think he is easily number one on the chopping block. Because if I'm looking at other teams, I'd say, Phil Neville's pretty safe. I always thought that if he had a bad year that he should, but I don't think David would ever get rid of him. I think Bruce Arena is safe. I just think Bruce has the pedigree. So you kind of look at other teams, Jordan, you're going, okay, if things aren't going well for a team, like Peter Vermees isn't going to get fired, and I don't think we're going to get to them next, but I don't think they're going to be as good this year either. I guess maybe Jordan, Ezra Henderson at Chicago is in danger. I think that his job, just because of how bad they've been, absolutely he could be one. But I think, yeah. What about you? Do you think he's number one?
I think his has got to be the hottest seat out there, right? Like I'm looking at just all the teams, and I'm like, some of them are in the middle of rebuild, some of them are in the middle of just hired somebody. If you're going to give them time, like Ben Olsen should have time. I don't think he's going to be, but they didn't really give Nagamura time, right? Or Todd Ramos didn't get a lot of time. There was a whole bunch of people.
Just name their whole coach
a lot of time. But I do think Ben Olsen will get time. So I'm looking at some of these names or in some of these teams, just teams themselves. Maybe Mastroeni.
I would say Robin Fraser or Mastroeni, even Vanny Sartini and Vancouver. Like,
yeah, those with Heath. But I mean, Heath would be because of just it's so high, right? The bar should be high by now. You've had time to build this whole team since their inception. The bar should be high. You should be improving, not regressing. Those other people, it might be that they are not even reaching a low bar, is maybe why they would be fired, right? Like Robin Fraser was manager of the year in 2021 due to the Rapids, but huge decline last year. If that decline continues, I'm thinking the only way they're probably pulling the trigger is if he's hovering last in the West. But Heath, I could see if they're just like almost like spinning their wheels, not going anywhere in the summer, and it is, they're ninth, maybe not ninth because it might be a playoff spot. They're 10th or 11th, and they're like 5 points off. It's like, that's something that's still reachable, but it might also be the time that we pull the trigger, right? Like that, I could see them maybe letting him go first in the season. But we don't know the inner workings of that stuff. So maybe he's just so buddy buddy with them. There's no option for him to even be fired. So who knows? But yeah, I think you agree. Just don't embarrass yourself. I am finished fourth for a successful season. I'm starting to raise the bar here. How long has Minnesota been around? It seems to go so fast for me.
2017, right? Is that that would be my guess?
2017 was the first season. Yeah.
Okay.
So they've been around for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons, all with the same manager, and haven't gone anywhere.
He did the same thing in
Regressing each year.
Orlando. Like he did the same thing in MLS in Orlando.
He didn't have as much time in Orlando.
Yeah,
but
it's the
yeah.
spinning of the tire thing for me. And then he gets frustrated when people criticize his work, and it's not been good work.
Yeah.
So I get it.
How much he rages against MLS,
Andrew Wiebe. He hates Andrew
Major
Wiebe.
League Soccer, and Andrew Wiebe. Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and move on to. I was just verifying. Yes, he was the manager the whole time. That's what I thought. Okay. Moving on to Sporting Kansas City. So, hey, stakes might be a little low here because they got a successful football team going on right now here. But head coach is Peter Vermees. They had a really down year, right? They lost, 2 of their DPs to injury last season, which was, Alan Polito was one of them, missed like all of 2022. Then, of course, you're not getting the same level of production from Salloway and Russell at the time. They scored 42 goals, gave up 54. That's like a playoff spot for the Eastern Conference. They finished 12th in the West. They finished 12th in the West, though. But again, what we're talking about with a lot of these teams that are kind of riding this line, right, is the defense giving up 50-some goals. How many teams have we talked about this week in particular that are giving up 50-some goals a season and only scoring 42 to 44 goals?
The whole episode yesterday.
Yeah. Now, of course, that was a joke. They did finish the bar for a playoff spot was actually higher in the East, 48 points compared to 47, which RSL had. But I was just making a joke there. They did have 11 wins, 7 draws, 16 losses. If they could have moved some of those losses to wins or a draw, then they probably could have made a spot. But this season was just kind of like DOA right away when both of their DP, like 2 out of 3 DPs go down like that at the beginning of the season. I think Polito was before the season even started.
Yeah, it was because they were trying to find somebody else before the season started.
Yeah, so you have some issues with that, but let's look back on it. It can't get any worse for SKC this year, right, compared to last year?
Yeah, like I would say only because I think Willie Agata is going to be really good in this league. He had 8 goals in just the 12 appearances that he had last year, and I thought was really impressive. Kind of a starlet child as far as the whole team was concerned. Daniel Salloway, I think, plays a step up from what he played last year because remember, he and Johnny Russell played out of their minds in 2021, right? So not last season before. So, I mean, you're looking at 2 guys that I think have talent. I think Johnny Russell's kind of getting to that point where you don't really know what you can expect with Johnny just because he's up there in age. Whereas Salloway shouldn't really have had that kind of regression. He was one of the top players in this league a couple of years ago. So I think you've got a really good mix there. Remy Walters, I think, is fine. Tommy, he comes over from last year in the midfield. So I think that's not an issue. However, there's huge concern going forward, and we'll kind of talk about that as we get more into SKC and what we expect this year. But I mean, these guys they're all very talented. I think that this was just a down year for them last year. They aren't going to be that bad defensively, I don't think. Could be, but we'll get to that. It just depends on what they do to kind of fill in some of these gaps that they have. But other than that, I think, they've got a talented roster. I mean, having an Alan Polito on the bench, Jordan, as a second option striker or whatever he's going to be, if he's going to slot in, if Peter Vermees is going to try to play maybe Polito kind of above, Agata below, above, whatever it might be, or whether it's just a second option coming off the bench. I think you've got two really good goal-scoring options there, and probably one of the most fruitful attacks if all these guys are healthy and playing well. So I don't know. I'm excited about the front at least, but we'll get to the back as we kind of get into what to expect this year.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at their history here, last year 12th, right? The year before 3rd. So it was a huge, steep drop. They went from 58 points to 40 points. It's an 18-point swing with losing those players. I would say maybe Salloway not being as good might be that when they lost everyone else, there isn't that many more people to worry about. So he's probably more easily marked and more easily disrupted than, having to focus on the other players. But I don't know. I think I expect this team to be better. Not to skip ahead here. They are bringing in a 29-year-old defender, Tim Leibold, who is a left back. He's also got what you said you wrote. Is these real stats? 20 goals and 40 assists?
In nearly 300 professional games, yes. Supposedly, that's
as
what
a left
MLS.
back.
That's what MLS had it. I don't know if that's right, but somebody had it on their website. So don't come after me if that's not correct. I thought it was nuts too. Honestly, I didn't back check that. So, but 300 appearances, Jordan, that's a lot. I think.
Yeah.
If you're scoring I could see the assist thing being correct because there are some of those like wing backs technically that become, this. But I double check me, anybody that is watching this, because that could be wrong, but that is literally stolen from the MLS website where it's signed. So I don't know.
Okay. They had to inflate these numbers.
300 appearances is a lot. Like at 29?
I show, hold on. I show him starting in 2013 to this year. He's only played in the Bundesliga once. The rest have been Bundesliga 2 and 3. And I show, according to FB Ref, okay, 234 games. And I show 14 goals, 23 assists. Now, MLS does. This is where they're probably getting away with this here. They count the hockey assists, so I'm guessing that they were able to inflate his assists from 23 to 40 because of that. But goals being 14, so maybe I'm just missing a few goals from maybe cup competitions that they're not showing me here. I'm not really sure, or maybe I'm not seeing any.
It says professional appearances, Jordan. So that's like he could have been 16 playing in like a professional league, like how National League and England's professional league, like it just said professional leagues. 300 appearances. I was like, for a 29-year-old, the stats looked outrageous, but I just put them on there because it's fun.
Those are fun stats. Hey, even if it's the 14-23, it's pretty good for a left back, right? So that I think that's fun, but I just had to double check that because I was like, what?
It's playing FIFA as the old age my player. Like
he's only 29.
I felt stupid putting it in there. I really did.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't blame you. I mean, this is if that's what they put on their when they signed him or whatever, who double checks that usually? It's just that sent so many alarm bells. I was like,
some German guy that's the stat checker, like some guy that's been a fanboy ever since he came into the league. He's just like, I love this guy so much.
Yeah, I'm betting on this guy to win the Golden Boot, so I gotta rack up these assists and goals.
He wants the over and under to be skewed.
But yeah, so his whole career, he's had one season in the actual top flight where he had 2 assists, um, no goals. But yeah, I mean, that's not really his job. So I'm assuming he might be used a bit going forward, but who knows? And then defensively, I'm not so sure how to really check a lot of defensive stats. So I don't know if I'm going to waste my time with that. But I assume he's worth it. Hopefully, this is very similar to the Kai Wagner move coming from the same sort of level of Germany to come over to MLS. So if he makes a move and he plays like Kai Wagner, who has good uh, goal contribution stats as well, then this is a very solid signing for Sporting Kansas City.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people excited about it. I remember there were guys that spoke highly of him and written about him. So I'm excited to see what he said. Like you said, Jordan, I think if you can find like a Kai Wagner, man, you hit the jackpot. But they also went in and added Nemanja Rodoha, who's a defensive midfielder. So that's something that they really missed having around last year. Ilya Sanchez, I believe, was a couple years ago. And then they had Isamat Miran and Uri Russell spent some time there as well. Isamat Miran, I think, was more center back, but I think he could kind of fill into that space in the midfield as well, play defensively. But I mean, it just seemed like they were just trying to find some stopgaps. But I think they're starting to kind of figure out that they need some more defensive help, and I think more will be on the way. I just don't think it'll be until the summer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what we're looking at. They did, did we mention the losses? They lost Miran, Rosell, and Vunovic, right? They lose 3 of them, but they do sign Leibold or Doja. It feels like they have some huge increases thanks to Polito coming back, and everyone being healthy. You would hope that this feels like a new club. So kind of looking ahead to 2023 here, while they are maybe a little healthier, the other issue is that maybe their aging core, right? That this is maybe still a team that's kind of on its last legs. Peter Vermees just had one of his worst years with the club last year. Will they struggle as much defensively in 2023? You write here that there is one healthy center back with experience because Ford had ruptured an Achilles out for the year. So maybe that's still a concern. Maybe they're still going to ship goals, but maybe they'll also be able to score some more now that everyone's healthy. So any question marks or things that stick out to you that they should try to address before the season, or maybe that piece in the summer?
I think they're going to have to rely on like enter MLS kind of moves, like maybe signing some free agents or finding somebody that's off contract and come in as center back depth. Just because I think that they're going to have some issues with having just one center back that has had MLS experience, the other being a backup to him and then a younger kid. So Courtney Ford, Jordan, was one of those like really high level center backs. Like his projection this year was going to be pretty high just because I think he's impressed a lot of people in that organization. You hear a lot about how Peter Vermees talked about how special he had been and like he was looking forward to his growth this year. And he really did think that he could become one of those special center backs in this league. But now you're looking at a poor kid that, I mean, we've gone through this with a couple of young, and I believe Courtney Ford's American, but they've gone through a couple now where Miles Robinson, same thing, ruptured Achilles. I mean, it seems like it's taking people out left and right. It's a pretty common injury here in soccer, but it's a season-ending surgery. It's a season-ending injury. I'm just really afraid, Jordan, that they're going to ship a lot of goals again, and they just can't afford to do that because I don't think their attack is I think their attack is decent. It'll be interesting to see how Willie Agata continues and see if he can kind of take that next step forward. But I think the biggest question mark here for me is, are they going to be able to stop leaking goals? Because Tim Melia is aging. I think he's 36 or 7. So an aging goalkeeper, an aging defense. Graham Zusi's still playing. So it's like, how much longer does that last? Johnny Russell, same thing. Like it seems like they've got that same. What's sad, Jordan, is that they're not a market. Well, I say this, and then they almost went and got Cristiano Ronaldo, but they're not a market that should attract some of these world superstars. there we go again. I'm sorry, SKC fans, but you shouldn't. It should be a tough place to kind of get guys to sign that are big time players, and I think that's kind of the issue that they're going to have going forward. Just because I think that this team is an aging roster, and it's oftentimes hard to cut the fat. And I think some of the fat still hanging around is kind of what kind of hampers his team a little bit. So.
Yeah. So what are we looking at for a successful season then for SKC? In my opinion, it has to be back in the playoffs. Is my goal for SKC. Okay, you can say you had a down year last year because of the injuries, because of blah blah blah, right? But now you have to prove that okay, that was a outlier. And now we are going back to where we were. We were third in 2021. 2022 was an outlier. We're going to be back to now, maybe not reach third, but I'm like a fourth, a fifth, a sixth. You want to be in the playoffs again, is where I'd probably put a successful season for Sporting Kansas City.
I agree. I think playoffs, getting back into it, however many freaking playoff teams there are. I'm so tired of doing this guessing thing. But I think even when it is 9 teams, Jordan, just making the playoffs, because I think that they could get dangerously close to what they were last year. Just because I have very little faith in age, because Father Time always wins. So it just seems like this team, while they might have added a nice piece and I think that I'm afraid of the aging roster. I'm afraid of what happened last year being the same story that's going to be written again this year, just because they haven't added much. And then they go and lose one of their top center backs. And I don't think they're going to be able to replace it with any kind of quality until the summer. But then you've got the issue of like, that's going to be where they're going to spend their allocation. And that time is finding somebody in that instance. And if one of their attackers go down again, like a winger, like if Johnny Russell can't play this season, or, something happens there in the midfield, where do you go? Right, where you turn. So I would say a successful season is the playoffs. I'm just not sure that this team is quite back to what it used to be.
All right, I guess let's move on to Houston Dynamo. Their head coach is Ben Olsen. This will be his first year in charge of the team. Reflecting on last season, they finished 13th in the West. Nagamura went from Sporting Kansas City 2 manager to the Houston Dynamo for his first head coaching job on a big stage. And Logan, he was let go in September. So there was 5 games left, it looks like here, for him when he got let go. And at that point, it's kind of like, why even do it, I guess, but whatever. So they had an interim manager from September to November 8th when the season finished. That was Kenny Bundy. And now we got Ben Olsen. Ben Olsen, most known for his manager career, 10-year stint at DC United from 2010 to 2020. He wrote out the DC United manager career for 10 years and was really kind of inconsistent throughout those 10 years. He finished with a 34.92 win percentage, 132 wins, 94 draws, 152 losses out of 378 games. He did win a U.S. Open Cup as a manager and won the Manager of the Year the following year. But his stint at DC was a lot of times make the playoffs, miss the playoffs, make the playoffs, miss the playoffs, make the playoffs, miss the playoffs type of situation. And it came to a head where DC had to let him go. Well, now it's kind of the issue of, will Houston give him time? Houston needs some stability. Logan, do you know how many managers they've had since 2019?
I would guess 6.
Ben Olsen is the 6th since 2019. That's 4 years, by the way. Do you know how many head coaches they have in their whole career as a club in MLS?
8.
It's 2005.
I'm going to go 8.
Close, 9. They have 9 managers in their almost 20-year history. 6 of them have managed in 2019 or later. So not great. If I'm running down the Houston managers, you had Dominic Kinnear from, of course, 2005 all the way up to 2014. He helped lead them to 2 MLS Cup wins. You had Owen Coyle that lasted not even 2 years, 2014 to 2016. You had Wade Barrett, who was an interim manager in 2016. Wilmer Cabrera from 2016 to 2019. Davey Arnaud, who was the interim from August to October of 2019. They had Todd Ramos, who somehow lasted 2 years, October 25th to November. Oh my God, I'm reading these stats. How did he last that long? Okay, October 25th of 2019 to November 4th of 2021. Logan, Todd Ramos had a 17.5 win percentage, which is the lowest in Houston Dynamo history, by the way. Paulo Nagamura took over for Todd Ramos from January to September with a 27 win percentage, and then Kenny Bundy as interim, leading to Ben Olsen. So a lot of the opposite of stability, instability, since Dom Kinnear left almost 10 years ago. They've also had new general managers. They've had new managers. You know, Pat Onstad took over as GM in 2021. So he is on his, I guess, second manager, if you're not including Kenny Bundy. So we'll see how far that goes. But we got new owners that came in. They had a whole rebrand that didn't really affect how the team played, right? When we look at last year, and they finished 13th in the West, they didn't give their manager even a full season. What are we looking at for this club? Like, what last year was a disaster, right?
Pablo Nagamura didn't really have an identity. They've never had an identity under Tab Ramos. They're still searching for that identity. They even went through brand changes to try to fix that problem. I love when teams do that when they think that the issue is the branding behind their team. Not that they think
Montreal.
that, but right. Yeah, exactly. But they think that a brand change will make the fans forget just how abysmal they have been. And this front office has just been atrocious. Like they go and they're hiring the wrong people. Right, they're grabbing as much as they can as far as players are concerned. They're throwing money and splashing cash, but not at the right players. Sebastian Ferreira, I think, is a decent signing. I don't think he's one of those earth-shattering players that, say like a Sebastian Giroussi is next door. But I think he is a player that could provide some consistency for this team going forward. But there's really not much on beyond that, right? Because you had Fafa Picault, who I think is a pretty decent player, but they could never get him going in a way that they really should have. You've got a guy like Hector Herrera, who they were awful when they got him last year, but it was because they couldn't figure out how do they play him in that central midfield and how do they get him involved in the attack, where he likes to get into the middle of the pitch, likes to create, distribute to those attacking players, but he could never get to those attacking players because their link-up play is so poor, right? Their defense is so bad. They just don't have a great fan base, to be honest, which is really sad because you'd always said that they had a really strong fan base up until about a certain point when I think fans started to lose trust in what they were doing in Houston. So I think similar to what, is happening in Dallas, I think that the fans just don't have the buy-in. The players don't have the buy-in. The ownership never bought in. They're spending random cash, and I think that their 2 good signings that they made last year just kind of overshadowed by their poor performance. And without DC United and without the Quakes, this is easily one of the worst teams in MLS. And Jordan, looking forward to kind of what's going on, can they build on anything that was successful this year into last season? No. Like, that's what's really bad about this team, is that there's really not much to look forward to from 2022. And we'll kind of get into that as we preview the next couple of parts. But no identity. Never had one, never will, I don't think. So it's kind of sad.
Yeah, you mentioned some of those departures, right? Fafa Picault is gone. Darwin Quintero is gone. Tim Parker is gone, right? They lost like half of their squad. Now let's look at the arrivals. So they signed attacking midfielder Amin Bassi from League 2 side from France, FC Metz. They also acquired Paraguayan international winger Ivan Franco on loan from on loan from Club Libertad earlier this month. They bring in Artur. They bring in Franco Escobar from LAFC, Brad Smith, Andrew Tarbell. And I will say, I actually really like a lot of these signings. I think that this is kind of putting them more on a path of a little better. Like, I think with these additions, plus if Ben Olsen's, he's been away from the game a bit, a couple years, 2 to 3 years, where maybe he's had some times to kind of reflect on what went wrong in DC. And if he's able to kind of flip a switch and some of these signings that have come in can help, along with another good season from Sebastian Ferrer, who maybe makes a leap, 13 goals and 3 assists. Maybe it's more like 17-6, right? 17 goals, 6 assists. Maybe it's a bigger leap than that. But, having that type of season, I could see this team improving, right? But looking at how it was last year, I think it was a good move to probably get rid of Nagamura. As much as I was kind of harping on how much the instability has been, Ben Olsen is a more proven manager, and he's a more proven manager than Tab Ramos. He's a more, this is kind of like one of the premier signings they could have made for an MLS specific manager at this moment in time. So I actually am looking forward to this team in 2023. Not like, I don't think they're going to be like hot, but I think that going into this year, there is some stuff to maybe look at. And I think they are a wild card in the West where I'm looking and thinking if Ben Olsen has a good year there, which that means next year would be awful for them. But if he has a good year this year, then this team could be hovering around a 9th place if that's a playoff spot. It really is going to depend on that. And I think at this point, we're kind of learning that we should probably be leaning to 9 playoff teams. I think the fact that Jim Curtin even kind of mentioned it, I think that kind of stuff is making me lean towards this is probably going to happen. And I think that this team can hover around that spot. And for a successful season, if I'm picking what is successful for them, they were just one point above San Jose, who was a disaster. From being the worst team in the West. Now they're going to have St. Louis join into this conversation, but I kind of like what they did more than I liked what the Quakes have done at times. So I think they should still be above them. And I think maybe they should try to be hovering around that 9th place. I don't think they have to make the playoffs for a successful season, but I need to see growth. I need to see growth in this team. I need to see the new people do well. I need to see Ben Olsen be on his A game. I need this team to be looking much sharper than they've looked in the past few seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of counteract that one with just the fact that, like, I'm Minnesota, I'm concerned about, but I don't know if they fall that far. Maybe they do without Reynoso. I don't know. I think it could kind of teeter on that disastrous season for Minnesota. But then I look at the other teams that finished above them. Sporting Kansas City, I think, gets a little bit better than they were last year. Seattle's definitely going to be better than they were last year. I think Colorado Rapids, I think, get better with the infusion of all sorts of different new players coming in. And I do think they take another step forward. I would say Vancouver is one that I'm concerned about. Like, I'm always concerned about Vancouver, just until they prove that they can be more consistently in the playoff hunt rather than chasing the bottom of the table. And then if you look at Portland, I think they're an aging core, but I think with Evander and the way that he looked in the preseason the other day, from the clips that I saw, I mean, he looks pretty special. So I think Portland steps up. I think RSL made a good signing today in the defense, and I think they've taken another step forward. I just feel like it's just San Jose, Houston, I would say Sporting Kansas City, and maybe Minnesota kind of in that mix with Vancouver too, of just teams that could have kind of a rotten year. The other ones I just don't see it happening to. So you kind of look at that. I think St. Louis is still kind of a coin toss because we just don't know enough about them. I like some of their players, but I think they kind of don't have that star player that this league really needs. So I would be concerned about St. Louis as well. But it just seems like this team regressed from what they kind of had last year. I thought Fafa Picault was a really good player. Memo Rodriguez was pretty good defender in the central midfield. Not great, but a good little piece to have there. I know Hector Herrera's there now. I know they go and add pieces. Artur is a good defensive midfielder. I'm just not sure he's in the prime that he used to be, so you kind of worry there. Losing Tim Parker is huge for them. St. Louis got a gem. I think with Tim Parker, I think he's a great center back in this league. Maybe not as good last year just because this team was awful, but I don't know. I'm still really down on Houston, and let's not forget. I mean, you and I were not high on the Ben Olsen signing. Like it wasn't like it was, like you said, it was probably a good spot for like a specific MLS coach. But like if you were looking to make a sexy hire, it was not Ben Olsen. This is more of like a one of the you know what he feels like, Jordan. He feels like a Sam Allardyce, where he's kind of like brought in to kind of stabilize, and then
I think it's a safe hire.
yeah,
I think he knows Pat Onstad. I think Pat was a player at one point that he was a player. But anyway, I do think that, like, yes, I was kind of down on the Ben Olsen signing because, I mean, there was a time where he was linked with Toronto after Greg Vanney left, and I was like, that would not make sense. Bob Bradley made sense. I think for a Houston team, Ben Olsen makes more sense, and I think he can, like I said, maybe I was more down on him at the time of the signing. I'm kind of feeling more good about it now with some of the signings they made, and I think just there are some, like, go back if people want to go back and watch classic matches that have Ben Olsen managing, there is kind of a more clear style there. There's a more disciplined team at times where I think he can maybe sort out some of those issues. But it's not enough needle moving that I'm thinking they're going to be winning the West or anything. I think they can, if it's 9 playoff teams, I think they can hover around 9th and probably end up finishing 10th or 11th. But that's an improvement from 13th, especially now that there's going to be 15 teams in the West. So just kind of my thinking on it. But let's move on to Dallas. Head coach is Nico Estevez. They finished 3rd in the West. Huge improvement. They allowed only 37 goals, which was the 2nd fewest in the league. But they only scored 46 goals, which is similar to the Rapids crew in Miami. So they finished with 53 points, which was 20 more than 2021. And it is the largest year-over-year improvement in club history, besting the 14-point improvement from 98 to 99. So reflecting on last year, that is a huge success and probably beat any of our markings that we had for them in our preview last year.
I think we had the Texas trio, like not very high, like we usually don't. I think we gave a little bit more of a leash to Austin just because we felt like some of their play in 2021 kind of leaked into 22, and boy did it. But we'll talk about them in a little bit. I think with Dallas, yeah, like I think Nico Estevez finally found an identity for Dallas in its defense. Like I think it was pretty much let's get nitty gritty and let's just hold teams to a low amount of goal output and we can win some games. And they did. They were one of the best defenses last year in the league up against the Union, which was really impressive just because, I mean, the Union felt at times historic in the way that they defend. So I think that Dallas being able to do what they did was a major improvement, but also kind of fascinating. It really just spoke to, I guess, the prowess on the defensive end, all anchored by Jordan Matt Hedges. So an interesting one because he's now gone, which is what we'll kind of talk about. But I think Nico Estevez finally found what makes this team tick, and it's let's get physical, let's blow teams up and just try to score more goals than they do while holding them to 1 or 2, if that. So.
Yeah, Matt Hedges and Franco Yara have left the club, but they bring in Giovanni Jesus and Sebastian Ibaga, right? Who was a free agent and signed a 2-year deal. So there you go. But is it enough, right, to flip this? There's no real replacement for some of those players that have left. So can they get more production in the attack? Jesus Ferreira had a fantastic season last year with this kind of new, they brought over Areola, right, from DC. They kind of reshaped the team a bit, and they were linking up. They were having good play, but that was a career for Jesus Ferreira. Is that possible to happen again? And if it does, when does FC Dallas cash out? Because we've kind of ripped on them before a few years ago when they were constantly just selling their right backs over to Europe, and 2 in a row, right, without even having any plan. And some of those have, like Brian Reynolds has not worked out overseas right now. He's kind of in limbo wherever he is. That didn't work out great for the player. Worked out great for the club with money. But the issue is then, when do they make that switch? When do they sell on Jesus Ferreira? Because if he has another year like last year, or even, God forbid, improves and scores even more, the big money offers are going to start coming. I think he's so young still.
Yeah, it always shocks me how young he is, and I think so many people are quick to kind of write him off because of U.S. men's national team. He hasn't really translated that game that he's played in MLS to the U.S. men's national team, but now I do think you're now starting to see a little bit of that leak over, and I think the confidence that he gets within the league, it'll help him tremendously in Dallas. But I think with the U.S. men's national team, one thing Jesus is very good at is hold up plays. That's 6 assists. He's combined for 24 goals, whether he was goal contributions last season. So 24 for a team that scored some 40 something, which was not great, is pretty good for Dallas. I think, Jordan, looking at this team, one of the big question marks that I had was just Jesus Ferreira needs to take another step, which is wild to me because he's had 18 goals last season. But without that, or Paul Arriola making a jump, I think that there is some concern that they just don't score enough to be one of those top teams in the West or the East. Like while they might sit there defensively, again, I just don't think that their attack is going to be as good as somebody like LAFC, Austin, Philly, Red Bull. Like, I just don't feel like they've got a good enough attack, which is crazy because they do have some options, but it just never has kind of translated into this team that's just banging in 50 some goals. They kind of sit in a weird spot where, I mean, I think they just finished around the crew, like production wise on the attack side. So they've got options. They just need to figure out how to kind of unlock some of these players. And I think that they can, but then some concern comes again because they lose Matt Hedges. Like, that's a huge loss in the defensive, back line. So it's a weird balance. I just don't know if Dallas really did anything to improve what they had last year.
Yeah, I mean, I really like Ibiaga, from LAFC coming over as a free agent. So I think that can be the Matt Hedges replacement. I worry more about scoring goals, actually, because it's rare to have another year like Jesus Ferreira did, or even, like I said, improve. So kind of worrying more on that end. And losing a depth piece like Franco Yara, is kind of like, okay, that was another center forward option that you could have used. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if they've improved, but I would say, looking at 2023, I think this is another. I think that you should see no clear drop off. I mean, they should.
Yeah, I think this is a top.
Yeah,
14,
this should not be an SKC situation where they go from 3rd back down to 11th. They should be able to, I would say, they're probably still favorites for a top 4 team in the West, is how I would probably say it. And if I'm looking at what would be a successful season for them, I'm looking at that in particular. I'm looking at a top 4 finish, and maybe when we're looking at the playoffs, it's making it a little farther, right? They beat Minnesota on penalty kicks. They lose to Austin in penalty kicks. In normal time, sorry. 2-1 that Austin beat Dallas. And I'm thinking maybe if you want to have a real successful season, top 4 with maybe a conference final. Right? Like, I think that is like a level of they've always kind of been the bridesmaid and never the bride, in the sense of when Oscar Prayer was there. They would win supporter shields. They get bounced out in the playoffs. They need to start being able to get to, I mean, they lost to the Rapids in the 2010, was it 2010? Yeah, 2010 MLS Cup final when two Western teams could end up in a final together. Crazy times. But, they were a favored team then and they couldn't get it done. And it's like they have to start making these jumps. So I would say fourth in a conference final would probably be a huge success. But if I don't know what fans are expecting, like, are they happy with just fourth? I would say they probably want to see growth. They finished fourth. They just missed out on a conference final. So I am going to say fourth and a conference final is success for this club.
Yeah. I don't know, like they finished behind LAFC and Austin. Third in the West. I just don't like Jordan. If you look at the starting 11, right? I mean, it goes Ferreira at the top, Velasco, Areola, and beside him, Pomykal, Leggett, Quigon, and then you've got Farfan, Martinez, Ibiaga, and then Jesus with Paez, who's been one of the best goalkeepers, and I think people forget how good he's been. He put is it Jim Maurer? I forget the guy's first name, but their backup goalkeeper is Maurer. He's been a staple for that club for a long time until this kid shows up and takes over the number one spot. I think it's Jim, but I could be wrong. But I'm looking at this starting. Is it Jim? I thought so. I wanted to say, was it Paul Maurer? Was the baseball player? I think.
No. You
Joe
had
Maurer.
Joe Maurer, yeah.
That's who it was.
Another J, yeah.
Yes, that's who I want to call him. But anyway, looking at the starting 11, Jordan, you look at Jesus Ferreira. I just starting there, like, he's no Sebastian Gerussi, and I hate to do this to them because they're in-state rivals, but they're not Sebastian Gerussi, right? Like, he's not that next level player, and I don't think they have a Sebastian Gerussi on this team. Maybe Jesus takes another step this year, but Jordan, if he takes another step this year, he's at 18 goals. He takes another step, he is Sebastian Gerussi. Like, Sebastian had 22 goals last year. So if he takes the next step, you're looking at, then yes, Dallas can be that number 2, number 1 spot, maybe even. But I just don't. Out of the games I've seen out of Jesus, I love Jesus, but I don't think he's on that level, and I don't think he reaches that level. But it's interesting because I think, like you said, they're always playing second fiddle to somebody else. I think they continue to do so here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more reasonable if they go from third to fourth if they make a deeper run in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And I think that's a possibility more than them maybe leaping to first or second.
Yeah, I think so.
Is what I would kind of think. But I guess let's move on and talk about the last team here, the last team in Texas, Austin, who under Josh Wolf, second season had a hugely Wolf out was not a thing last season like it was the first season, and they had a huge leap, but they ended up getting smashed in the Western Conference Final by LAFC 3-0, which kind of left a bitter taste in the fans of Austin. I think, like, in the mouths of Austin fans, I felt like they were like, we're riding this high of finishing second in our second season and getting to a conference final, and then for that game to not even be as close as we kind of thought it could have been, ended up leaving a little bit of a bitter taste. I think now they've kind of gotten over that a bit. I think they're ready to look ahead and think, all right, now we have a real shot at maybe winning something like a supporter shield, or maybe make an MLS Cup final run, right? Which is what I was rooting for. So that way Philly could have hosted the darn thing last year. But we have what was a historic great season, something that will live in Austin fans' memories for a long time. Driussi, like you said, had 22 goals and 7 assists. He played spectacularly. The team itself scored 65 goals. They were like scoring 5 goals a game at some point, and their defense gave up 49, which is not terrible, but not great, right? It's kind of in that middle. Kept it under 50, right? That's the big thing. Keep it under 50 in MLS. So what do you have to say about 2022 for Austin, Logan? It was a huge success.
Yeah, massive. You and I think we were just like, we need to make the playoffs this year, Austin. Like, I think that was your next step. And they
Yeah.
blew everybody away. Like a historic turnaround, like you said. I mean, just no team's ever done this, where they've gone from being completely irrelevant to just all of a sudden world beaters. I mean, teams hated going to what is it? Is it Q2? Yeah, that's Q2. I always can't remember which ones, lower.com and West End and Q2 and Q that and QAnon and
Lower.com
is
is
crew.
Columbus.
Yeah, and then what's Cincy's called?
TQL.
TQL. That's the one I get it mixed up with because of Q2. But Q2, a hard place to play. It's warm. The atmosphere, I would argue, Jordan, I would argue one of the best in the league. I think one of the top fan bases in this league as far as home crowds are concerned. They show up, they show out, they sold out. I mean, it felt like this team was just destined to be great, and they were. Like everything about them. Sebastian Gerussi had a historic season, 22 goals scored for the Argentine. So it was an amazing season. It was one that I think they'll never forget. And I think they're hoping to kind of build off that success this year, which is even scarier because of how good they've been, how good they were last year. Just the fact that Sebastian just owned this league, and I think he could do so again this year. So I'm excited about where Austin is headed. Really excited about the season that they had last year, but kind of looking forward to talking about maybe some things that Austin can be concerned with this year, because I think while there's a lot of positive, Jordan, there's a lot of negative with this team. And so it'll be interesting to kind of go through this team and kind of preview what's going to happen.
Yeah, so they end up losing Cecilio Dominguez, which is not a huge loss, right? And then they lose Jared Stroud. Felipe Martins went to Orlando, right? Andrew Tarbell left. Ruben Gabrielson left. And Jite is gone. But in comes Adam Lundqvist from Houston. You get Leo Weisen.
I think it's
There you go.
Weissman, yeah.
From Elfsborg, Jassy Zardes coming in at center forward. Will Bruin coming in at center forward. I like both of those a lot. They also signed Alfonso Ocampo Chavez, and they also signed Amro Tarek to the team. So out of these additions, I really like the Zardes. I really like the Will Bruin. These are depth pieces, right? Like Zardes might start a few, right? He might start a lot. But Bruin is not going to start that much. He's going to come off the bench. He's probably going to give you a few goals, which you need down the stretch. I really like these two signings and their MLS experience. You're not hinging on some sort of hope that a player from Brazil is going to come over and adapt immediately, like that they tried to do with Pochettino, in that first season, and he didn't really cut it. This is, I think, really great additions to which, like we said, wasn't an issue really, but I think the more that you can have on the attack and bench options for somebody hurt, somebody's tired. You have these games. We're going to have Leagues Cup. We're going to have Open Cup. We're going to have, they're going to be in Champions League. These are the type of things you need, right? If you're in Champions League, you need to be able to have a pretty big bench because you're going to be playing Sunday, Wednesday, or Saturday, Wednesday for a good chunk of the time. And then you're going to have a huge Leagues Cup season as well.
Yeah, I think, Jordan, what they did last year is they went and they looked at, and I guarantee this is what happened. They looked at LAFC, who smashed them in the Western Conference Finals, and went, okay, what are we missing? Because my goodness, what growth, right? I think as you as an Office fan or Office fan, yeah, as an Austin fan and an Office fan,
we are screwed.
I'm really impressed with how quick you pulled that up. For those of you that don't know, on StreamYard, we actually have clips when Michael Scott's saying that. But no, if you're an Austin fan, Jordan, I think you're okay with that bashing in the Western Conference Finals, because I think every hero needs a good villain, and I think LAFC is that villain. And now In movies, Jordan, when like you go and you try to fight the villain absolutely just decks you in for the first time around because you're like, what the hell was that? Right? When Bane beats up Batman in the dark and he goes, I was born in it. It
I'll
was
give you a better example.
but,
You're playing a video game where you get your ass kicked, and then
yeah,
you have to be like, oh, we have to restart that one. I do now, right? Is
yeah.
kind of the way.
Yep, 100%. So I think that's what this is. I think Austin looked at themselves in the mirror and did a great job of being honest and went, okay, what do we need to make that next step? LAFC lost Chicho Arango. That's a massive loss for LAFC. I think
And
Austin,
apparently, Aubameyang is not coming.
and
I think he
yes,
said he's staying.
right. So LAFC's got a massive hole that they're not going to be able to fill until at least, I think, the summer with anything comparable. And then that'll be interesting because Europe will have just ended. So anybody they bring over from there isn't going to be ready to play. So it just, I think Austin looked and went, Giazzi Zardes is a great addition. Will Bruin, great addition, right? You already have Diego Fagundes, who had one of his best years he's ever had last year because of Sebastian Giroudi. You have Maxi Urruti. That's a fun thing. And Maxi played well, 9 goals. What a hell of a backup he is, right? So you got all these people, Jordan, that like they've got no positions for half these guys because they're so crowded in so many different areas that this team is stacked. Depth, anybody gets hurt, I feel like there's a lot of viable options. Jazzy Zardes will play underneath Jerussi, I believe, in that starting, kind of like that double striker kind of situation. I think the biggest thing for them is Rigoni. I think him coming in last season late, he played 7 matches, 3 games he started. He just wasn't that great. Emiliano Rigoni, who was a DP. And I think that's what sucks is that Austin had to go and spend that spot on him. Because I think if they waited until this winter, I feel like this team would be like LAFC level where they go and find somebody else, I think, that kind of fits that system better. Rigoni could, but I just didn't see it in those 7 games. But again, it takes a little bit to get adjusted. Who knows what happens in this 2023 season. But I do have concerns about Gabrielson, who was one of their best center backs, or one of the best center backs in this league. So I worry that losing him is going to be massive to that back line, and they already didn't defend as well. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But Jordan, I actually think that this is the Western Conference for Austin to lose because I think LAFC will regress a little bit just because Chicho's gone and they just don't seem to have the same magic.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, of course, Dallas had better defense than Austin last year. So if there was a chance for Dallas to make a leap, it would be with Austin maybe giving up more goals and not scoring as much, and maybe turning some of those wins into draws or losses for them to be able to leapfrog them. That's probably the downside for Austin is I don't know if you can finish. I think looking at the squad, it's a good squad. They can finish second in the West again. But I think you might also see just a little bit of a dip. We don't know how much the Reyna situation is going to affect them. Who was signing these players? Was it him before he officially stepped down? Was it, did he step down earlier than he did? All of that kind of stuff. There was some scandal there that Austin kind of got roped into. But I would say, looking at it, this team could probably repeat with a second place finish. But if I'm them, I want to make MLS Cup. I want to be the next Atlanta United. I want to win this thing super early in our history and say we are the next team that, like, the next MLS team is going to look at and say we want to model ourselves after Austin when they come into this league. That is what my goal would be for Austin. If I'm looking at a successful season for them, they definitely have to still finish top 4. And then I'm thinking you have to, even if you just get to the Western Conference final again, you have to put on a better showing than 3-0. And I think that's probably the goal. It doesn't have to be reach MLS Cup final. I'm sure that's their aspirations, of course. But I think they're going to be adding on CCL. We don't know how anyone is going to adapt to the League's Cup yet. I'm thinking a top 4 finish, preferably top 2, with another Western Conference final appearance. Scoreline would be a huge success for their 3rd season in the league.
Completely unacceptable. You got to win the league. No, But no, I look at the rest of the West, and I think Dallas does regress a little bit just because I don't think they can really outperform what they did in the attack. I just think it's going to be pretty average or maybe even below average because, or I'm sorry, not below average, but below what they did last year, just because I think Jesus is not the person that he was last. I'm not convinced just yet. I want to see another season. So I still feel like I still feel like there's in both sides, right? That it's three teams. It's the Union at the top of the East and everybody else underneath, and nowhere close. I don't think. And then you've got LAFC and Austin, and then below them again. I don't think anybody's close. So I think those three teams right now are just so good, so talented, so deep. The Union got deeper. Austin got deeper. LAFC was already deep. They just lost a couple. So I don't know. I don't know what your feeling is. I know this is more of an overall, but I feel like those three teams are the cream of what we probably. I mean, it's ultimately what the cream of the crop for MLS. But I think everybody else is kind of trying to catch up to them. So yeah, it could be an interesting this season. And then if you look at it, if Sebastian Giroussi takes any kind of regression here, then I think you're right. I think that then you kind of go, okay, well, he can't be like that, like he was last year. But maybe what he can't be, Giazzi can. I don't know. Like I feel like I don't know. I don't know how you feel about the three teams that I just mentioned, but I feel like those are the three teams that we're really looking forward to this year.
I think it's tough because it's very rare for it to ever be the same top 3 teams again, so I'm not sure I can fully agree. Now, of course, when my previews come out, they might look like those top 3 up there just because it's hard when these teams have depth like that, but it's tough. It is tough because it's MLS, and there will be a team that probably comes out of nowhere like Austin did that we're gonna look at and be like, "Man, this team really turned it around. This team is looking pretty darn good." I mean,
Orlando's going to be great when we see them.
they could. I
They
mean,
could.
so the thing too is, right, there was 2 Western teams that were like that last year, which was Dallas had a huge leap, Austin had a huge leap. And this is why they play the games, right? It's hard to look at these standings and think, it may not shake out too much different than it did this year because while Seattle is going to improve, they also have an aging core still, right? There's still an issue there. So while we expect them to make the playoffs again, who knows? They should improve, right? But I'm thinking for Austin, they're going to look pretty darn good again this year. And like I said, they should probably be, I would think, finishing in the top 4. And if I want it to be harsher on them, I say you have to finish top 2 again. But they're still such a young team. And like, maybe not young player wise, they do have some youth that way. But I mean, like a young team in the sense of a club in the league. This is only their 3rd season we're going into, where this is something to kind of look at and say, hey, you got to be really good this year. It seems kind of harsh. I feel kind of bad saying they have to get to a Western Conference final again, but I think that's a compliment to Austin fans of how good this team was last year. And I'm sure that, look, Austin fans were woof out season 1, so I'm sure they have heavy expectations going into this year. I'm sure most fans are thinking we should be able to overtake LAFC this year, is what I would think. Because I can potentially see a drop off there, but it's tough. It depends on if they're favoring something like the Champions League, right? If you're LAFC, are you favoring a Champions League? They get a bye. They don't have to worry about a group stage for the Leagues Cup. They can go right into the knockout stage and maybe make a healthy run in the Leagues Cup. There's so many opportunities for trophies for LAFC that maybe Austin can steal a top spot in the West, but success-wise, top 4, get to a conference final again, I think is what most fans would probably be really happy with, because it's not like a full progression the way we've seen like the Union continue to have progressions each year, but it is a progression in the sense of let's get a little further, or it's so hard to say MLS Cup or bust for a team that's 3 years in. Is my point. I know I just rambled, but whatever. Your thoughts, Logan? Anything before we wrap up our Austin or full previews here?
No, I think we covered it all. Looking forward to the next show, Jordan. We got St. Louis, Nashville, Cincinnati, Chicago, and the Crew on the 15th. So we're going to do that Wednesday. We're hoping to have some guests on, but again, it's usually just waiting on some DMs, so we just don't ever really know until about the day before. So I did send a message. Hopefully, we get some St. Louis guys on to talk the new expansion club, and then Jordan. Our last team preview episode is going to be next. I guess is that Monday? Yeah, Monday. The Red Bull, NYCFC, Philly, DC, and the Revs. So looking forward to that. I think we're going to try to have Todd. I think he said on for.
Yeah, I'll reach out to
Union.
him.
Okay. So haven't reached out to Todd yet. We're just kind of mentioning his name, but.
Yeah, throwing you under the bus, Todd.
Yeah,
you can't let us down now.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, it's always fun to have Todd on. But then after that, Jordan, I think next week, obviously, we're gonna have the season preview. It's either the 22nd or 23rd. I think we decided. I think Wednesday, but I can't remember. So, oh man, it's coming. Some new kits have dropped too, so that's exciting. But other than that, nothing else to add.
Sorry, I'm reaching out to him right now.
Oh, okay. I was like, are you? I thought you were frozen because you're doing a really good job of saying still. But now looking forward to it. Guys, if you haven't checked out my Orlando City podcast, you can definitely check that out. I am a Orlando City fan podcast. It's called City Beautiful SC. So if you are out there listening and you want to hear some Orlando specific things, I just started a podcast and I just dropped the third episode, which was the Orlando preview that Jordan and I did the other day. So looking forward to
that one. You can skip the third episode because you just heard it on our show. But yeah,
that's true. Yeah, it's true.
Did you add anything to it?
Yeah, I added some stuff. Yeah, talked about.
Okay, so go back and listen to it anyway.
Absolutely.
So you can reach us on @Stateside Show on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can email us statesideshow@gmail.com. I hope you all enjoy watching or listening to this episode. We got 2 more season previews to go before we do our huge prediction show. And thank you all, and have a great rest of your